Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.
Good evening. There were enough political charges and countercharges flying back and forth from Boise to Pocatello today to fill any reporter's notebook. For instance, there were charges today that a federal investigation is needed of possible improper election activities on the Fort Hall Indian Reservation in eastern Idaho. The state Republican Party chairman, Dennis Olson, at a news conference in Pocatello today asked for that investigation. And in Boise today, Democratic congressional candidate Richard Stallings lashed out at what he called, quote, George Henson's sleazy campaigning. Stallings was complaining about thousands of flyers placed on cars yesterday in church parking lots all across the 2nd District. The Idaho Pro-Life Political Action Committee placed the flyers, which urged the support of incumbent Republican Congressman George Hanson in tomorrow's election. The flyers call Stallings' position on abortion, quote, mediocre. Tonight, on the eve of the election, we'll examine both of these stories and how they could impact on Idaho's vote tomorrow. Republican Party Chairman Dennis Olson had his news conference at the federal courthouse in Pocatello this morning to talk about possible election improprieties. Afterwards, he got an earful.
It's an effort by the Republican Party and by Mr. Olson to intimidate the tribal voters on the reservation. They knew about our registration effort a long time ago. They could have come to us and discussed any issue that they thought it was concern of the Republican Party. Instead, they wait until the day before the election to come out with all of this information they call. There will be no poll watchers on behalf of the tribe at any of the precincts tomorrow. What there will be is people that will interpret in Shoshone or in Bannock language, explaining people how to vote, you know, how to run the machine.
Now, this gentleman is saying that we're objecting to interpreters, and that's categorically false. The tribal newspaper says this: the council plans to enlist poll watchers to see who votes and to provide guidance to reservation voters. Now, poll watchers perform a particular function. They are provided by law. They are not there to give advice. Now, also it says there will be interpreters. We have no objection to interpreters. We have no objection to everyone who has the right to vote voting. But I want it clear that their paper is what said they were using poll watchers to give guidance to reservation voters, and we question whether that's legal.
How do you respond to that, Mr. Funke?
That is the exact point I'm trying to make, is that this man takes some article out of our newspaper and tries to pin us down on a typical classic kind of operation. I'm telling you, we're not going to have any poll watchers.
Was that a mistake in the newspaper then?
Obviously it was. And that's something he could have cleared up a week ago or whenever he got this article out of our newspaper if he would have taken the time to do so. But he doesn't want to do that. He wants to chill our right to vote by holding this press conference today. That's what he's up to.
We want to encourage people to vote. It is not our intent to intimidate. Now, if these people have set these folks up in a way that they can be intimidated, I think that they're doing a little intimidating themselves. If you'll read the very article they say here, plans to enlist poll watchers to see who votes. Now, I'm wondering what that means to the reservation people.
County clerk's office. That's
you know,
the people to call.
I believe. Are you asking me the question,
Either
or do you want to?
Either you or the news, whoever. If you're really interested in...
I've checked with the U.S. Attorney's Office. We're checking with the
county clerks.
We're checking with the county clerks.
Check with the county clerks.
We're doing all of that. But, you know, this is something that came up the last minute. For example, let me point out to you here.
Interpreters.
But Mr. Funke did say that was a mistake in the newspaper.
Called tribal supervisors meeting Monday. You know, this has been a little hasty on the other side. We learned of it.
This is the first time we got involved in the election. For the first time.
Oh, marvelous.
We as tribal people got out and are trying to vote and do what we think is
you're really
is
doing
what
is
we
out
should have.
pushing certain candidates. Let's face it. Your objective is not to get people involved in the electoral process. It's been to get out in favor of certain candidates. I'm not saying that.
Both. Republicans
you are
and
taking
Democrats.
a partisan position on this. You're not just encouraging your people to get out to vote. You're encouraging them to get out to vote for certain people.
Everybody has their own mind.
That's right.
Wilson,
that's your job. That's your job to get people out to vote Republican.
It's a job
right?
for everybody.
Are you operating
All
here?
of
Are
these
your
years,
concern
you've
out of
been
fear?
controlling everybody. Now
We have
it's
a couple
our
of closer
turn to
elections.
try to
Our
get our
objective
people
is to make it a
vote.
Your
legal
response
election.
was out of
For what?
fear that the tribe could sway the election.
You
not
can
in your
call it what
favor.
you want. Our objective is to have a fair election.
Why can't the man come out in the first place, sit down like gentlemen and discuss this the way it should be? What he wants to do, he wants to bring the United States Attorney, the FBI, and everything, circle those bad Indians and round them up and take care of them.
That videotape was recorded earlier today on the steps of the federal courthouse in Pocatello. Dennis Olson is with us now in Pocatello, as is Jack Ross, who is an attorney representing the Shoshone-Bannock Tribal Council. Mr. Ross, let me ask you first about United Press International is quoting you today as saying that what Mr. Olson is trying to do is to kindle what you called latent racism, if the quote is right. What do you mean by that?
I think what Mr. Olson was trying to do here, acting on behalf of the Republican Party, was to try to align Democratic candidates in southeastern Idaho with the Indians and thereby appeal to what I think Mr. Olson hopes are some latent feelings among the populace of southeast Idaho against Indians. I think it demeans not only Indians, it demeans all voters in southeastern Idaho to pull this kind of demagoguery. I think it is a sad day in the history of this state. It is a sad day in the history of relations between Indians and non-Indians when the Republican Party, without any attempt to check or verify its facts, would move at the 11th hour to promote racial hatred in this state, and I think that's exactly what we're talking about.
Well, Mr. Olson, you've heard the charge.
Well, saying it doesn't make it so, Mark, and that's a pretty serious allegation. I resent it. Nobody has fought harder than the Republican Party to protect the rights of people to vote. Now let me make it clear what the facts are. On Saturday night about 10 o'clock, I learned that of this article in the tribal newspaper in which they said that they were going to enlist poll watchers to see who votes and provide guidance to reservation voters. In addition, the same article said that the nutrition program, the Head Start program, the Land Use Policy Commission had reserved vans to bring people to the polls. In addition, there was a letter that went out, and I have it here, a letter that went out to all the tribal members, paid for by the tribe, not just encouraging people to get out to vote, but sending a list of people to whom they were to vote for. Now, our concern, let me tell the whole story.
Let me just interrupt to say that the list, as I understand it, contains almost all Democrats.
Well, there are some Republicans too, but that's immaterial. The point is this a proper use of tribal funds? We want to know whether there are any federal funds involved in those tribal funds, if there are, if this is proper. And furthermore, Mark, we were also approached by tribal members who were afraid to let themselves be known because of the fear of retribution, because they disagreed with what the tribe was doing, and they felt like this was an improper use of their funds. And so all we did, and I emphasize this, all we did was ask that there be an investigation. Now, if there's any racism being introduced here, it's the other side trying to get a particular race to line up in a particular way to vote, and they are the ones that are injecting the racism. All we want is a fair, impartial election. We want to protect people's civil rights. There's nothing more important in my mind than protecting the integrity of that ballot box. Now, if what they have done is legal, they have nothing to fear. But for them to say that we can't go to the Attorney General and the U.S. Attorney and say, would you look into this, without all of these accusations flying, then I think they're imposing on our civil rights, upon the civil rights of all the voters, because the voters are entitled to know and to find out and to make sure what goes on there is right. And you know, after the fact, it's too late. Actually, well, if we have done something here that will prevent an improper action, we have actually protected the tribe as much as anybody, because that way they won't do something that's improper. It's better to do it before the fact than after the fact.
Mr. Ross, does Mr. Olson have a point or two here about the possible use of federal funds to transport people or whatever?
Mr. Olson, in the rush to judgment to get this issue rolling against the Indians and apparently against the Democrats on the eve of the election, has failed to check his facts. There will not be 1 cent of federal money utilized in the tribe's efforts tomorrow to get voters out to the polls. There will not be any federal vehicles nor employees paid with federal funds taking people to the polls. What this really is about, not only is it an appeal to latent racism, an appeal, I might add, that for all non-Indian people in southern Idaho taking a look at this issue, think about this issue. Think about what it means when you go to the polls tomorrow and vote. Think about in 1984 in Idaho, the same kind of tactics, a little more sophisticated perhaps, a shade more sophisticated than Selma and Mississippi and Alabama 2 decades ago, but the same kind of racist tactics being employed. It's despicable, it's outrageous. More to the point, there's a definite effort to intimidate Indians from going to the polls. I am here to say that the tribe will not be intimidated, that there is absolutely no factual basis whatsoever to the allegations passed on apparently by Mr. Olson to the U.S. Attorney over the weekend, to a Republican United States Attorney, who then has the FBI moving on to the reservation this morning to begin checking supposed allegations.
You've had FBI agents on the reservation
Yes,
today?
we've had the FBI called in by the United States Attorney after Mr. Olson had contacted the United States Attorney. I would point out that under the provision cited to me by the United States Attorney, which talks about willfully buying votes, that is the suggestion, if one can believe it, that the tribe is trying to willfully buy votes. It is a federal criminal offense under that federal law, punishable by up to a $10,000 fine and 5 years in prison. And we are outraged, and I mean outraged, that the United States Attorney for Idaho would call us this morning and suggest that our 70 and 80-year-old people who have never voted before in their lives may be possibly subject to $10,000 fine and 5 years in prison. It is absolutely despicable. There is no factual basis whatsoever for these charges.
Let me interrupt to go back to Mr. Olson here for a minute. Mr. Olson, I think anyone who tried to look at this objectively would see that perhaps there was some use of language in the tribal newspaper that might raise questions in almost anyone's mind about what was going on here. But does Mr. Ross have a point that maybe you should have checked it out a little bit before going quite so far with it?
Well, first of all, he says there are no federal funds involved, but when I want to count the chickens, I don't send in the fox to do the counting. Now, we'll find out if there are any federal funds involved. If there were none, then there is nothing to be concerned about. But it's very clear that the tribal newspaper, and that's all that was provided to the U.S. Attorney, was the tribal newspaper and the letter. The tribal newspaper said they were going to use poll watchers to guide the reservation voters. We know that's not right, and we aren't the ones to enforce the law. We only turn it over to the appropriate officials, and what's despicable about this whole thing is the fact that we attempt to maintain a fair and unfettered election to protect the integrity of the ballot box and get accused of all sorts of things because of that. Now, if we cannot go to the appropriate officials and have them conduct a fair investigation, then perhaps they've got something to hide. And if they're hiding something, then I'm going to stand up for the rights of all the voters in Idaho, including a lot of Indian voters who are very upset with what the tribe is doing, who believe that the tribe is improperly using their funds. We're going to stand up for them, and we're going to see that this is a fair election. And I will not stand still for being accused of conducting despicable activities. My whole life has been dedicated to protection of the freedom of our country, Indians and all alike, and I don't appreciate those accusations.
Mr. Ross, how about Mr. Olson's concern that perhaps some Indian voters might actually be intimidated by what the tribal government has done?
I think that's absurd. I don't think the tribe is coercing or improperly attempting to influence anyone's vote. This marks the first year in the history of Idaho that the Shoshone-Bannock have attempted to organize a substantial voter registration drive. The tribe in recent months, entirely within the limits of the law, has been cooperating with the county clerks in Power County, in Bingham County, and in Bannock County to get with roving registrars to get people out to vote. We have, through that process, lined up in the neighborhood of 550 new people, Indians, on the reservation who have never before been registered. That would bring the total number of eligible Indians for tomorrow's election who can vote to as many as 1,000, perhaps as many as 1,500 Indians. Now, the tribe held on October 19th a session in which all local candidates, Republican, Democrat, be whatever party they were invited to the reservation for a forum to discuss issues based on question and answer discussions at that session, which were aimed at discerning the views of candidates, whatever their party, with regard to the reservation and the critical issues that the Indians face. The tribe made certain endorsements. We endorsed a total of 34 different races or candidates. 10 of those happened to be Republican. So approximately a third of the endorsements were Republicans, approximately 2/3 were Democrats.
Well, is Mr. Olson worried about those Democrats? Is that the bottom line here, that you're worried about, that he might be worried about as you see it? I'm not trying to put words in your mouth.
The bottom line, Mark, is that obviously, since there are both Republicans and Democrats, that isn't the issue. The issue is a fair election conducted in accordance with the law, and our simple request that these matters be checked before the election rather than after. And we laud the effort to get the people registered. We haven't challenged that. We're delighted to see the participation. All we want to do is to make sure that it is conducted fairly. And let me say again that we are not sure that it's proper for the tribe under any circumstance to use tribal monies to endorse certain candidates because there are other people out there on the reservation who feel differently but who are afraid, frankly, to come forward and oppose the tribe because of retribution. And we're going to stand up for their civil rights as well.
Final comment on that, Mr. Ross, and I'm afraid we're out of time.
Well, I think it partakes of the same kind of shady, one might even suggest a Gestapo is not too strong a word, when we throw out these nameless, faceless tribal members who are objecting. Nobody is going to be intimidated by the tribe on this issue. The tribe, at long last, is exercising its right to vote. If the tribe wishes to vote in a block to protect its long-range interest, when we have questions about those people, including our current congressman in the 2nd District, as to whether they're really looking out for our interests, well, then we have a constitutional right to block vote within the limits of the law. And that is what Mr. Olson is afraid of, that the tribal vote, a strong vote tomorrow, and it will be a strong vote, and a block vote, I don't know. That's up to the people individually.
I got to go, gentlemen. Mr. Olson and Mr. Ross, we thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Now on to our second story tonight. As recently as last Friday, Democrat Richard Stallings said on this broadcast that he was worried about what he called a last-minute abortion smear from Congressman George Hansen. Well, smear or not, Stallings' position on abortion was criticized yesterday in leaflets placed under windshield wipers on cars in dozens of church parking lots across southern Idaho. Stallings says they misrepresent his position on abortion, and he told the Idaho Statesman today, and I quote, "It's the filthiest thing I've seen. The people are sick and tired of this sleazy, vile campaigning."
We've been expecting the last-minute smear. Hansen has traditionally waited until the Sunday before the election to drop something, and he certainly didn't disappoint us this time. Throughout churches in the 2nd District, he had his people put the abortion piece that tries to tie me to abortion. Now, he's been doing that through the whole campaign, and he went so far as to say in Lewiston that this election would be won on the abortion issue. And so he has done a very effective job now of putting me on a very defensive, difficult situation with no time to respond. And he has just sunk to a new low as far as I'm concerned.
Stallings was also asked today if George Hansen or his campaign could be directly tied to the leafleting of the churches yesterday. Here's what he said.
Can't tie him directly to it. He's too clever for that. But he's absolutely involved in it. When he says that the election will be won on abortion, and when he is obviously using abortion all the way through, and his history has shown a last-minute smear, all the facts are there. Of course he's involved.
For more on all of this and how it might affect tomorrow's election, we turn now to spokesmen for the two campaigns. Bill Hansen, George Hansen's son and campaign manager, and Paul Pugmire, who is the press secretary for Richard Stallings, both of whom are in Pocatello tonight. Mr. Hansen, the charge is made that your campaign was directly involved in this.
Well, I'd like to start out to say that our campaign was not involved with this whatsoever, and I think Mr. Stallings is getting pretty desperate right now to come up with these type of statements. I mean, he's lying. He's out and out lying. Our campaign had no involvement whatsoever in this. I found out about it yesterday, on Saturday morning by one of our individuals in Pocatello, Idaho, one of our supporters, that said that a lady from Boise had called her to help distribute pamphlets. And so I went back to the Boise Statesman. So I saw a press release in there on Thursday about the Idaho Pro-Life PAC putting something out. And so I went and looked that lady's name up, and I tried to call her almost 20 times on Saturday until I finally got through to her at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I told her, I was on the phone with her almost a better part of an hour trying to dissuade her from putting that out on church property on Sunday. The Hansen campaign has never done anything on Sunday like this. And one thing, Mr. Stallings says we have a history and a tradition of doing things on Sunday before an election, and we have never done anything on a Sunday before an election, including this year. This was not us. It was an individual independent PAC that we have never even contacted this whole election, and for him to come out with these type of smears of himself, I really don't appreciate it, to say the least.
Mr. Pugmire?
The thing that's very important here is the things that are important are appearances, and it's very difficult. It will be very difficult for Mr. Hansen to separate himself from what happened when he's put so much money into advertising campaigns and radio and TV that lie about Richards or strongly imply Richards' positions are in favor of abortion, in favor of gun control. We get telephone calls in the headquarters daily saying I was going to vote for Richard till I found out he was for abortion and gun control. This is a result of the campaigning done from Mr. Hansen, and that appearance is there, and it's going to be very difficult for him to separate himself from that.
Your candidate told the Idaho Statesman in its edition that was published this morning that this could cost him the election. Is it that serious?
It's very serious. If people think that Richard Stallings is in favor of something as heinous as abortion, that's why we react so quickly. Richard is...
What are you doing to react to this?
Well, we're on this show. We are planning on continuing to distribute pamphlets which were originally produced to respond to the original ads from the Hansen campaign, and we plan on distributing pamphlets that respond directly to what happened yesterday. The whole idea of distributing literature in church a church parking lot on Sunday is disgusting. I went to church yesterday to rest and to worship and see my friends, and I'm taken out of the meeting halfway through to come and deal with a situation where they're politicking in the parking lot, and it's been unpleasant for everyone.
I'd like to say likewise that was the first time I had seen this piece of material was yesterday after church. So, you know, for anybody to imply that the Hansen people or anybody were involved with this type of thing is just totally ludicrous, and we totally turn off any type of activity on Sundays. We have never done it. Mr. Stallings is the one that's had press conferences and fundraising dinners on Sunday, not us.
Do you disavow, does the Hansen camp disavow this and disavow the message that is contained in this leaflet, which basically says that Richard Stallings' position on abortion is wrong?
Well, I think basically the message in the piece of material, I haven't just seen it the last day here, is basically pretty straightforward from what I understand. The only problem we have with that is the mode in which they put it out. We would much rather have had them put out, and I told the lady in Boise this on the telephone on Saturday when I was trying to talk her out of putting it in church parking lots on Sunday. I said, why can't you put it in shopping malls on Saturday or go door-to-door Monday or anything like this? And for one thing, to say that this is going to have an impact on Stallings' election, it's going to have an impact on the Hansen election. There are a lot of people out there that do not like this type of activity, and it makes it look like Stallings is coming out saying it's our people that are doing it, which is an out-and-out lie. And
well, Mr. Pugmire, Mr. Hansen is saying that he tried to talk these folks out of doing this.
Well, I certainly hope that's true. I wasn't in his home when he made those phone calls. I don't know that it's true or not true. Like I say, the thing that's important is what people perceive. The appearances are important. And given the fact that there have been such heavy ad campaigns on radio and TV trying to tie Stallings to abortion, it's going to be very difficult to disassociate himself from this.
For one thing, our campaign ads on abortion and gun control and all of those other issues are talking about not Richard Stallings being for abortion or for gun controls. They're talking about who he's going to vote for president, who he's voting for leadership of the House of Representatives. As a good Mormon or standing of the church, we would hope that Mr. Stallings would be against abortion. We have nothing to believe he's otherwise. We're talking about maybe degrees here and not being for or against anything.
Well, let's talk about those degrees for a moment. As I understand it, where the Idaho Pro-Life Political Action Committee disagrees with Mr. Stallings' position, I guess Mr. Pugmire should answer this, is that they contend that he made a switch in position from 1982 to the present in being against what they call the Human Life Amendment, which would prohibit abortion at the federal level.
Richard's position is consistent as it always has been. It coincides directly with that of the LDS Church. He's opposed to abortion except in the cases of rape, incest, and danger to the life of the mother brought on by the pregnancy.
But the Human Life Amendment, as I understand it, would prohibit abortion in all cases except where the life of the mother was in danger.
It's best to, when you speak of a Human Life Amendment, to talk about it in the plural. There are many proposals out in the public which would do many different things. Many of them would throw into havoc our rich history of legal development because it would define citizenship at conception. Some of them would make illegal certain forms of contraception.
Well, is Mr. Stallings in favor of any constitutional amendment dealing with abortion?
His basic position on dealing with the Constitution at a general level is that the Constitution should be tampered with as little as possible, and he is a states' rights advocate. An abortion or legislation or whatever that prohibits abortion, except in the case of incest, rape, and danger to the life of the mother.
There's the Hatch Amendment, for example, Senator Hatch's amendment from Utah that proposes to return this issue to the states. Would he support that?
Richard would support an amendment which would give the states the right to deal with any issue, to deal with the abortion issue as they see fit, as the people of the state see fit, without federal intervention.
Okay. Mr. Hansen, is there really very much difference in the way the two candidates view this issue?
Well, for one thing, I don't think Congressman Hansen perceives any of these constitutional amendments as tampering with the Constitution. I think it's going back to correct the wrongdoing of the Supreme Court 11 years ago that makes federal-funded abortions approved and advocated. We have major problems with the federal government paying for these abortions, and I think to turn that around, just like the school prayer decisions or anything else, I don't consider that tampering. I consider that positive changes to save some human lives.
Yeah, but as a practical matter, when you get to the specifics of how this would work, there really isn't very much difference, is there?
Well, there's a lot of difference between the Hatch Amendment and the Hyde Amendment and the Helms Amendment and all of them, and you know, at this point right now, we'd probably take any one that we could or any variation to try to prohibit some of the things that have been going on in this country. I mean, we just have been having over 1 million abortions. I mean, it's just crazy of all of them been going on. And, you know, you can start talking about different bills or something, but the answer is something just has to be done. And we just need some good, positive changes in that.
Mr. Pugmire, Mr. Hansen said a moment ago that this might hurt his father's campaign as much as Mr. Stallings.
No, I would not discount that. You know,
backlash, so to speak.
Certainly. Mormons do not like their church being used for political purposes.
That's why we tried to persuade them from doing that.
In terms of a constitutional amendment to react to the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision from the Supreme Court, Congress can react legislatively as well as constitutionally, and a constitutional amendment is a drastic step, and it should be done very carefully in every instance, no matter what the amendment.
Okay. Mr. Hansen and Mr. Pugmire, you're good to join us tonight.
Thank you.
I guess this will all be over one way or the other tomorrow. Huh?
Thank goodness.
Thank you. That's our time for tonight as well. We'll be back tomorrow. I'm Mark Johnson. Good night.
Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.